Welcome back to Silent Paws and Brave Hearts. Call the police. It didn't echo, it detonated. Every conversation in Maison de Ciel stopped at exactly the same moment. Every fork froze between plate and mouth. Every candle seemed to shiver in its holder. 43 people turned toward the sound, and what they saw stopped their breath completely. Victor Langford, owner of the most exclusive restaurant in the city, stood in the center of his gleaming marble dining room, his face twisted with something that had moved far beyond irritation into something uglier and more revealing. His finger was extended like a verdict, pointed directly at a couple seated near the kitchen doors. "You and that dog," he said, his voice dropping into a cold, deliberate tone that carried to every corner of the room, "need to leave my restaurant. Immediately." And then the room saw the dog. He was a German shepherd of magnificent size, black and tan, with amber eyes that had already swept the entire room and returned to Victor's face. He did not bark, he did not lunge. He rose from the marble floor in one smooth, unhurried motion and placed himself directly between the woman at the table and the man doing the shouting. His broad chest faced forward, his eyes were locked, his body was perfectly, terrifyingly still. A waiter near the kitchen stumbled backward into the wall. Gasps moved through the room like a wave. The woman at the table reached forward and placed her hand gently on the dog's back. "Easy, Titan. Stay." Titan stayed, but his eyes did not move from Victor Langford's face, not even once. Outside, through the tall glass windows, the distant wail of police sirens had already begun rising through the Chicago night, and what nobody in that beautiful, chandelier-lit room understood yet, what would change everything within the next 4 minutes, was the identity of the calm, silver-templed man still seated at that table. The man who had not raised his voice, the man who had not stood up. The man who was simply watching Victor Langford with the level, patient gaze of someone who has spent 31 years deciding what things mean. His name was Alexander Grant, Federal Judge Alexander Grant. And the woman beside him, the woman whose hand rested on Titan's back with the quiet confidence of someone who has faced far worse than this, was Dr. Sophia Grant, Secretary General of the Global Human Rights Council. Within 4 minutes, every person in that room would understand what had just happened, and Victor Langford's world would never be the same. In the center of Chicago, Maison de Ciel was not merely a restaurant, it was a declaration. Victor Langford had spent 11 years building it into the city's most coveted reservation. Marble imported from Portugal, chandeliers commissioned from a Venetian glassmaker, a wine cellar that journalists described in tones usually reserved for cathedrals. Billionaires celebrated here, politicians made quiet arrangements here, celebrities arrived through the side entrance to preserve the illusion of privacy while ensuring they were seen. Victor loved all of it, the deference, the whispers of recognition when he walked the floor, the power of deciding every single evening who was worthy of entering his world and who was not. He had never examined that power too closely. People rarely do when it flatters them. That same evening, Alexander and Sophia Grant arrived quietly, without announcement, without expectation of anything beyond a good meal and a few hours of peace. It was their 10th wedding anniversary. Walking beside them was Titan, certified service animal, loyal companion, and the reason Alexander Grant was alive to celebrate any anniversary at all. 5 years earlier, on a hiking trail in the Colorado mountains, a sudden blizzard had descended without warning. The group became separated. Alexander, disoriented in whiteout conditions, had lost the trail completely. His body temperature dropped through the night as the storm worsened. By the time the search team was mobilized, 11 hours had passed. They found him because of Titan. The dog had stayed pressed against Alexander's chest through the entire night. Every degree of warmth his body could offer, given freely, without hesitation, without rest. When the search team entered the tree line, they followed the sound of steady, rhythmic barking, not panicked, not desperate, but patient and deliberate, like a lighthouse in the dark. The team leader later wrote in his report that in 30 years of search and rescue, he had never seen an animal maintain position like that, like a soldier with a single order who intended to keep it until his last breath. When Alexander opened his eyes in the hospital room, Titan was beside the bed. His heavy head rested on Alexander's forearm. His breathing had finally slowed. Alexander had looked at that dog for a long time without speaking, and somewhere in that silence, the judge who had spent his life arguing for human dignity found himself understanding it more completely than any courtroom had ever taught him. Some things love you without condition, without reason, without needing anything from you except your presence. Titan was family. He had been family since that mountain. He would be family until the last day. At Maison du Ciel, they were seated near the kitchen doors. Not near the chandeliers, not near the windows with their view of the city lights. All the way at the back, where the kitchen exhaled warm, greasy air every time the doors swung open, where the soft music was replaced by the clatter of pans, where the lighting was practical rather than beautiful. The maître d' had hesitated before leading them there, but he had obeyed. 30 minutes passed, no water, no bread. The tables around them, seated afterward, received their first courses, their second courses, their wine. A waiter passed their table 3 times without stopping.
Titan sat quietly beside Alexander, his ears turning slightly at every rise in nearby conversation, his amber eyes patient and watchful. Then Victor Langford arrived at their table wearing his practiced smile. "I must be direct with you," he said, his voice smooth and low, for their ears only. "This establishment maintains a certain atmosphere, a certain standard of experience for our guests." His eyes moved deliberately to Titan. "And I'm afraid that guests such as yourselves are disrupting that experience." "Guests such as yourselves." Alexander looked up. "He is a certified service animal. Your staff reviewed his documentation at the door." Victor's smile did not waver. "I understand that completely. However, our food has not arrived," Sophia said quietly. "We have been here 40 minutes. Every table around us has been served." Victor leaned slightly forward. His voice dropped further, taking on the specific coldness of a man who has decided the conversation is already over. "Perhaps," he said, "another establishment would be better suited to your situation." A silence fell over the nearby tables. The couple at the next table had stopped eating entirely. An older woman 2 tables away set down her glass and did not pick it up again. Then Victor turned to Titan and raised his voice, deliberately for the room, no longer pretending this was a private conversation. "That animal looks aggressive. It is making my guests uncomfortable." He stepped towards Sophia. Titan moved in the same instant, 1 step forward, body low and forward, eyes locked on Victor with an intensity that made the air in the room feel different. Not threatening, not violent, but absolute. The total focus of a creature that has decided this is the moment, and this is the line, and nothing on earth is crossing it. "That's it!" Victor's voice cracked upward, unraveling completely now, the performance falling away to reveal something smaller and uglier underneath. "Call the police! Get them out of my restaurant!" Titan did not move. He stood between Sophia and the man shouting, perfectly still, like something carved from loyalty itself. The officers came through the door in under 5 minutes. 2 of them, moving quickly, eyes scanning the room with professional efficiency, turning toward the disturbance at the back. Victor stepped forward immediately, gesturing broadly, wearing the expression of a man who expects to be agreed with. "Officers, these people have been disrupting my establishment, and that animal has been threatening my guests, and I want them—" The first officer stopped walking. Not gradually, completely. His partner walked into his shoulder. Officer Reyes had served 12 years on the Chicago force. He had walked into hundreds of tense rooms and learned to read them quickly. What he was reading right now made his spine straighten in a way that had nothing to do with training. "Sir," he said quietly, and then with the careful respect of someone who understands the weight of a title, "Your Honor." The second officer, Marcus Webb, was already looking at Sophia. He had attended her lecture at DePaul University 2 years prior. He had shaken her hand. He recognized her the way you recognize someone who permanently changed something in how you think. "That's Dr. Sophia Grant," he said softly to his partner. He did not say it loudly. He barely said it above a whisper. But the room was so completely, utterly silent that every single person heard it. The word moved table to table like fire finding a trail of dry grass. The corporate attorney near the window had appeared in Judge Grant's courtroom 9 times. He sat very still and said nothing, because there was nothing that needed saying. The woman who had set down her wine glass pressed her hand slowly to her mouth. At the bar, a young man who had been filming quietly on his phone lowered it slightly, looked at the screen, and understood exactly what he was holding. A wealthy businessman near the center table turned to his dinner companion and said, barely audibly, "Victor just threw out one of the most respected federal judges in the country." Victor Langford's face had gone the color of old paper. His mouth opened. I wasn't aware. I didn't realize who—" Alexander Grant stood up. He did not move quickly. He did not raise his voice. He simply rose, unhurried, grounded, with the complete stillness of a man who has nothing to prove and knows it. "That," he said, "is the problem." The room did not breathe. "You didn't know who we were. That is precisely why what you did tonight reveals exactly who you are." He looked at Victor with something that was not anger, something quieter and more permanent than anger. You do not owe a person dignity because of their title. You owe it to them because they are a person. That was true when we walked through your door. It was true every minute we sat at that table. It will remain true long after tonight. Sophia stood beside him. She looked at Victor with the particular calmness of a woman who has stood in rooms of genuine power and genuine cruelty and learned to tell the difference between the two. "Prejudice," she said simply, "always reveals itself. Always." Not one person in the room spoke. Titan looked up at Alexander. His tail moved, once, slow, deliberate. Alexander placed his hand on the dog's broad head for a moment. Then the 3 of them walked out together, through the silent room, through the tall glass doors, into the cool October night. The footage was on every screen by morning. 3 separate guests had filmed the exchange. The phrase, "guests such as yourselves," played on a loop across news channels before lunch. By evening, protesters stood outside Maison du Ciel with signs. By the following week, the reservations had dried up completely. Within 3 months, Maison du Ciel closed its doors permanently. Victor Langford appeared on national television 8 weeks after that evening. The man on the screen looked older. The cufflinks were gone. The posture had changed into something that carried its own weight now. I judged people I hadn't spoken to, he said, his voice unsteady. I made them feel less than they were, less than any person deserves to feel. He paused. Judge Grant, Dr. Grant, I am genuinely, deeply sorry. Some apologies come too late to repair what they broke, but they still matter, because saying the true thing out loud, even when it costs you, is how people begin to change. 2 weeks after the broadcast, on a quiet Saturday morning, Alexander and Sophia walked along the lakefront path near their home. The water was gray-green and wide. The trees had turned. The air carried the particular clarity of autumn in a city that earns its beauty. Titan ran ahead of them on the path, nose working through the cool air, ears up, tail sweeping wide arcs of pure, uncomplicated happiness. Every 30 seconds he glanced back, confirming they were still there, still his, still together. He always confirmed they were still there.
Sophia watched him and smiled the way people smile when something moves them more than they expected. "You know," she said softly, "he handled that better than most humans would." Alexander watched Titan circle back to them, fall into step beside his left knee, look up once with those amber eyes that had watched over him through a Colorado blizzard and a Chicago dining room and every ordinary evening in between. "Yes," he said quietly. He looked down at the dog for a long moment. "Because loyalty doesn't judge." Titan's tail swept wide and slow and proud, and the three of them walked on into the bright, ordinary, irreplaceable morning. The value this story carries. This story teaches us that dignity is not a reward. It is not something earned by title, achievement, or recognition. It is owed to every human being simply because they are human. Victor made his judgment in seconds based on nothing real, and that judgment cost him everything he had. Titan reminds us that the purest loyalty asks nothing and gives everything. He did not protect Alexander and Sophia because he was commanded to. He did it because they were his, and he was theirs, and that was the whole of the matter. And Alexander's words carry the lesson that outlasts everything else in this story. You do not need to know someone's title to treat them with respect. Not in restaurants, not in offices, not on sidewalks, not anywhere. We can choose better. Every single day, we can choose better. If Titan's quiet courage stayed with you tonight, if Alexander's calm dignity or Sophia's grace reminded you of something true, then you already know what Silent Paws and Brave Hearts is for. Subscribe so you never miss a story. Share this one with someone who needs it. And remember, the most powerful thing in any room is rarely the loudest voice. Sometimes it is a dog who simply refuses to leave.